Hello. Today we're going to talk about our final chapter, Database Administration and Security. We need security in all of our systems. You know, security is a really big deal now. I'm sure you remember Target. There's lots of new things breaking almost daily on security problems, and database security is sort of the last line of defense. Right? When you get down to the database, if your data is encrypted, so that even if somebody gets it somehow and they don't have the ability to decrypt it, you still have security. But then if you're going to do that, performance is going to be degraded. And you're going to have to deal with the cost, excuse me, with the cost of slower organizational performance. And that's some of the trade-offs with security. So we'll sort of go through our last chapter, and that'll be for our semester. So today we're going to remind you how important the data are. Today, we talked about the portals and things in chapter 13 and the dashboards and how we do data mining and how we use it to improve organizational performance. Always, live today by active monitoring and those things. And so it's not hard to believe that the DBMS is critical. But it's also not hard to imagine that since it is such a central role in the organization and data is such an asset to the organization, it touches every aspect of the organization, the culture, the managerial perspective. A lot of times it drives the technological capabilities needed, right? If you need a certain performance from your DBMS, then you need a certain level of the DBMS, and then that will lead you to a certain kind of computer. And then finally we'll talk a little bit about the DBA, who is the central person responsible for managing. Well, data is a corporate asset. There's no doubt about it. I think if you think of all of your customers' names and emails, how valuable that is to you when you have some sale offering or something like that, is it's obvious. It's obvious that data has value, because that's how you're going to reach the people that are going to buy the product and provide the profit that you need. And it's also going to be the system that keeps track of all of the activities that happen in your organization and allow you to collect all of your debts and to pay all of your bills. So data are really important. And so what we want to be able to do is leverage that data and get as much out of it as we can. And what keeps us from doing that is when our data is inaccurate, when we have some integrity issues where we can't believe the data that we have, or somehow the data is wrong. And so that we need to clean up. And so our job as data people is to know what data we have, understand what the organization needs, and to do what we can to bring those things together, to answer the questions with the data that we have. Well, so data quality is our first thing. Right? If our data isn't correct and have integrity and be correct and be valid, then we're not going to be able to use it for the things that we need. So the first place we have to start out is with good quality data. The data has to be good. No garbage in. Right? We want to keep all the garbage out. Right? And so that's our main mission. And within the DBMS, we're going to have resources that allows us to keep track of our data and to see what data is being accessed, to see what data is, where it's coming from, and if we have problems from those data, how to resolve them. And then when we have data, I think I mentioned about in our power billing system, we had data generated every period by the billing process, but then we did an outload as part of the final steps in billing was to do an extract of that data into another database for the marketing people so that they have the most up-to-date data. So keeping those data coordinated and managing your data is to keep high data quality is really important. Well, so here's the sort of the overall life cycle of the process. And I think we've been over something similar to this before. So here we have our management, our person who has the decision to make. And that is this is the agent or the person in this case that is going to take the data and analyze it. It's going to put it into their own spreadsheet, going to do some value added to that data to do a manipulation of it of some sort. And that's going to be our beginning of what is information. And then the more we are able to have information and the more we know, the more we use it, the more useful it can be. And so then as we learn more, as we talked about in the data mining, as we learn more about how things work, then we can use that to influence decision making, change our actions, and then of course it's a nice, beautiful little cycle that comes out here, down through here, and up through here, and down through here, right up to the user, and continually improves our data action. And that's an important reason of why we try to engage in this process. We want to embed these ideas into the organizational behavior so that everybody is thinking about what data they have, what data they need to make the decisions that are important to their part of the organization. And then the idea that we're going to have this continuous process of using the data to drive our decision making and change our activities. So the database is such a central element in a systems organization that you have to think about it when you introduce a particular database. Most of the time I doubt you'll be involved in processes like this because most organizations already have databases today. Where you go, there'll be an established database that is used by most of the systems, and for whatever system you're developing, or you might start out maintaining a particular system, you will be instructed on what database or what DBMS to use. But when you're starting from scratch and you're changing the organization, you have to be aware of what technology currently exists in the organization and how does that work, and then how does the DBMS going to fit into that current framework, and is it going to work at a level of performance that you're going to need. And there's a lot of benchmarking studies and things like that you can look at, but really you often don't know exactly how well it's going to work until it's in. And so you usually do a little bit of overkill on the computer end and get a little higher end computer than you might think you need, and hope that that extra hardware and cycles will offset some of any performance issues you have with your DBMS. Well, making sure everybody's on board and managing the whole process of the all the different levels of the organization that are going to be impacted by the DBMS. There's many people at the what you might call line or clerk levels of the organization that their life is changing because of the introduction of the DBMS, because that usually is accompanied by some difference in business process also. Well, and as their work life changes, the next level up, their management experiences the effects of that change, which are not always bad, but always are influential. People, when change occurs, there will always be some, I guess, resistance, but a slowness to adapt, and management has to deal with that, and that's part of knowing that this is what you are dealing with is an important dimension of being a systems person from any perspective. On any system that you are working on, not only the introduction of an entire database, you have these issues to deal with. And so managing the management and managing the organizational perspective on what you're doing is really important. And then there's also the cultural aspect where people need to know that you are listening. I mean, there's few skills more important than listening to what people are saying. Because if they really believe you're listening and you're hearing what they're saying, then you'll be able to explain to them why this is a good idea. And it's really important that you bring everybody, or at least as many people, along as possible. Well, sort of the DBA has evolved over time. It's when the beginning they were just super users who started using computers and made things work, and then once we started seeing how cool they were, we have information systems departments in charge of running computers, especially back when they were very large. Now the networks are so dispersed and there's so many computers attached to the networks that information systems departments are critical in organizations today. And this is the kind of department that you'll be working in whenever if you go into IT, or maybe you're already working in, but that's what you'll be. You'll be somewhere in the IS department, most likely. And your job will be to develop solutions to give management and users the information they need and to provide the data to support all of their processes. Well, the DBA has the responsibility for the database. And where I've been, we really only had one DBA. And our systems administrator was more in charge of overall general recovery, things like that. These dimensions are often mixed up depending on the size of the organization. Only the largest organizations are going to have a true data administrator or information resource manager, sort of a higher level CEO, COO, or CIO kind of level person. Many organizations will just have DBAs, and maybe they'll specialize in managerial versus technical areas or something like that. Well, everywhere I've been, the database administrator is part of operations. It's part of the normal line within in information systems. Although our database operations would usually cover all of these different functional areas, but The operational, I think, was where our DBA spent the majority of their time. Once the system was actually released, the only person who was really paying any attention to how it was working was the DBA. All the rest of us went on to developing another new system of some sort, or maybe doing some maintenance changes to the current system or something like that. And then the DBA was also involved in implementation, but mostly, as it says here, down in the testing phases. I don't remember our DBA ever commenting much on our actual database design. You know, they just wanted to know how much data would be in every table and things like that. Well, so here's sort of a summary of what the DBA does. This is a figure from our chapter. And so there's a whole bunch of things that we want to do to maintain our data in terms of standards. Naming conventions, data dictionary details, synonyms, anything like that. And these are things that the end users need to be aware of. And it's pretty much easy for the DBA to enforce things on the end users because all of their interactions sort of goes through things that the DBA can control. Most of end user interactions are through some sort of program. This has to be the 95% of all interactions. And so, well, it's the programming, but here's where 99% or 95% of the use of the DBMS is in the application programs. And now it's the programmer that writes them, but it is the managers and clerks that spend most of the activity using the applications and programs. Actual query interfaces to the DBMS are relatively rare. And then what the DBMS has is he or she has an interface that tells them what things in the DBMS are being accessed the most often, how many, which columns, which tables, sometimes even which rows and which tables. And it's a very interesting interface. One of the most interesting interfaces in it is the lock contention interface, where you see where you have different locks appearing and disappearing, and that was one of the most interesting things I thought from a DBA perspective whenever I was working. Well, the managerial role, I think you could argue, you know, even though I'm sort of the technical side programmer, designer type, I think the managerial role and more the bringing everybody along role. I don't know if that's the cultural or making sure the users understand why they have to follow the policies and how those benefit everybody, and helping everybody to follow security policies. There's really an uphill battle with security, and people are getting better and better all the time, but it's still always an issue. And then whenever there's data distribution, where, as we talked about, horizontal or vertical fragmentation, it's even a more complex role for the DBA. But it seems to me that one of the most important roles of the DBA is the management of the backup and recovery of the database. Those are that ability to do that, the ability for the transaction logs and the before and after image files to be used to restore the database to a state of integrity very close up until the time of failure is a really, really dramatic thing. And it's really important to the continued operation of the organization and the uninterrupted operation, or the minimal interrupted operation of the organization. And so, to me, this is like one of the most important aspects. And so you have to have a plan. You have to know what you're going to do in terms of disaster management. And we kept the full backups of tapes on site, but we also kept them at another site about 100 miles away, so that if anything happened, if we had a bomb or a fire at our location, then we would still have our full backups within a couple of hours, and we could be back up and running, assuming not all our computers were destroyed or something, within a relative short time. And actually, our disaster management plan allowed us to be back up and running in another site within 2 days if we could recover our site. So, of course, there's a number of different type of backups, and managing the backups is an important process. We just worked really hard to set up a known process for our system, and then tested that process repeatedly until everybody was really satisfied that it worked. And over time, it really did work fine. But managing a problem when you have it is always I don't want to say crisis. It's always a point of excitement or tension, let's say, where you put all these things into place to allow you to recover. But when things happen, and then you do have to recover, you have a period of tension there. But then what I found is that then after you actually do recover, everybody seems to be happy. It's sort of like, we did dramatic tests of our backup procedures, like our ability to go to a tape and restore our operations. And so we tested it. But until we had a disaster and saw how well we were able to recover, I think everybody felt better afterwards. Well, of course, technical role is the most interesting to me, I guess is what I was going to say. Usually you won't have to pick a DBMS. Most of the places you go, there will already be one in place. The testing of the performance of applications and identifying bottlenecks within applications, and testing multiple applications and how they work within the DBMS, and setting up different clusters of cables on different disks to see how they work when there's multiple systems, and there almost always are multiple systems using one DBMS. There's a lot of interesting tasks involved in the technical role. And then there's someone also has to do all the support and training of users. There's lots of support that users need. And I guess I have an old person's bias. I think it's better if they can actually talk to someone, but sometimes I'd rather get my information faster right over a frequently asked question or something. So who knows? Well, things are changing a little as we move into the cloud, right? Because now what you're doing is you're like buying an instance of a database in somebody else's DBMS, and you're just accessing it over the internet. That's essentially what you had. Now it's still a relational DBMS. It still has all of the procedures needed to keep it backed up in recovery. But now your role is to mainly to monitor that those things are occurring, because that's part of the service that you're buying from the cloud, is that fully backed up 100% operational DBMS. You don't have to install your own updates, although I bet you are still responsible for testing and all of that stuff. I remember when one of our updates came from Oracle. This was about 2 years into the operation of the system. And it was a big deal system for back then. And a lot of the forms package quit working with the new version of Oracle. Of course, all the SQL and all that stuff. Right? But we were using the forms package because it was sort of easier to use. Because not all forms packages have programs. Right? Someone, like when you're working with Access and you're navigating through all those different windows and properties boxes, do you ever wish you just had a program? Just give me one program that I could look at and just write the program instead of answer all these little questions. Well, yes, that's a big deal for us, right? We're programmers, we didn't really want to use these interfaces. But so Oracle Forms, what they called it back then, had you could write it as code, and it would then read it and do all the windowing stuff. And so that's how we did it. And it came out that it quit working because of some of the features that they put in the new thing. So we had to change all of our programs. And I want to say it was like 175 user interfaces and another 90 reports or something that had to change. I remember we were sitting that day where we figured out that it wasn't going to work and there was no way we could get it to work. And it was like, oh, shoot. And then we said, well, so what do we got to do to fix it? We figured out what we had to do to fix it. And then about 15 minutes later, we wrote this program to change all of to go through and read all the files and then write them all out with the new stuff in it. And like 2 days later, we were perfect. But still, that's where, your updates to your DBMS software cause your whole, could have caused your whole billing operations to come to an end. And of course, we did figured all this out on the development computer well ahead of any installation onto operations. Well, I think it's hard to overemphasize security these days. There's some definitional things. Making sure nobody can get at your data. More and more, there's things that you have to be able to say, like the university has to report that it is keeping track of emails of university officers like the president and dean, all those people, all their email has to be logged and to be in compliance with a number of different laws. Well, and of course, the one we've always been worried about up to now is database integrity. I mean, we gotta have our data correct. Right? I mean, to us, that's the most important thing is data people. But you can see that these other things are really critical for the organization because we can't afford to be out of compliance. We can't afford to have our data perfect and correct, but not protected from other people who want it and shouldn't have it. And of course, we also want to make sure that we got our almost 100% availability too, so the people that should get it when they need it. And so this is what you're shooting for. And is there a trade-off between availability and confidentiality? And yeah, there probably are some trade-offs in here. But our security domain is only getting more and more complex as we move forward. Well, we create what we call security policy to try and be sure that we cover all of our possible bases on what could happen from a security problem. And essentially what we're going to do is we create this policy, and then we have somebody else come along and evaluate that policy and see if there's something we've missed. Do we have any vulnerabilities? Are there things that in our way of doing our task, we are leaving open holes that someone else might use to get at our data or to affect our systems, our runtime or uptime? And this security audit, the idea of auditing your security and your database is not new, right? We were audited in, let's see, I guess it was in 1987 or 8, right? Where our billing system had a complete audit from, was it Deloitte? Who knows? But it was called in from outside of, it was, this was Department of Energy, so it was called in from Washington to audit our system. And so these guys came down, come in, audit our system, and looked at all of our security and all of our access. Do we have the right people with the right data? And of course we did. And do we have, we had all the necessary audit logs so that anytime anybody changed anything anywhere in the system, we knew when they changed it, what it was before they changed it, what it was after they changed it. And sort of ran an audit log that was then used to provide reports on accesses to management at the end of every billing cycle. We didn't really have any audit problems. But what I want to say is even though you might think that the auditor could be smooth in the way they interact with you or something like that, you should value the second look at what you're doing. Right? Auditors, system auditors, spend a lot of time looking at these things, and they see things that are problems that we don't always see as designers, because sometimes we fail to make security a primary part of the system. And to me, that's important. Right? We want to have security built directly into our system. But still, for me, it usually ends up just another half a dozen tables or something like that in my database that I use to manage all of my security. So, I think welcome the audit. It's not the same as a tax audit, right? Where you're already presumed to have done something wrong. Here, they're here to help to make sure that there are no problems, and that if there are any, that we can get them fixed. Well, a vulnerability means that there's something out there that can provide access to your data or cause your data not to be available, and you don't know about it. And that's usually, it's a vulnerability. I guess you could know about a vulnerability. It becomes a threat when someone is going to exploit that vulnerability to actually impact your system, meaning you know something about it. And of course, a security breach is when somehow your data is lost, or maybe it's not corrupted, just copied, who knows. And it's a real, like I said already, a serious problem. Well, here's a number of different things that cause our data to be vulnerable, and how we can try to offset some of those things. Well, people are one that's really hard, right? Because if they don't pay attention to security and they don't care about their passwords, then it makes security hard to enforce in some situations. Anytime you can have physical security, your security goes way up, right? Where you have to have keyed or hard access, your security goes way up very quickly. But some of the things we can do is enforce password policies, which I don't know about you, but sometimes I get sick of password policies. And especially on things I think are like, why do we even need a stupid password for your site? Anyhow, don't get me started. Then there's other things like things that are on the workstation, things related to computers. It's something that you know there's a computer is going to fail. That is definitely going to happen. So you have to have your computers backed up. If you're an information systems and you're responsible for that mission, then those computers have to be backed up. And sometimes you have to have sensitive data on your laptop. Although we're trying to get more and more away from that with secure networks, but it's still a major issue. Of course, if everybody's using the operating system, any vulnerability discovered in the operating system now is part of your system, right? So you need to be sure that you are staying current on all of your patches and paying attention to what's going on with your application or with your operating system, and keep all those things up to date. Your applications, you need system walkthroughs to be sure you control for certain application bugs like SQL injection, which allows your sessions to be used to do things, to access data that you wouldn't really want to have happen. And so each one of these has a number of different approaches that you might use. And the important thing is that security is only as good as all of these things together. And that is something that I sometimes gets lost. If you're weak on any of these dimensions, you're going to have weak security. And so it's really an important part of the DBA's role is to maintain these security at these different levels. Well, in our databases, what we do is we have commands where we grant different levels of access of different user groups to different database resources. For example, we grant Power Billing users the ability to create new rows in the Power Billing transaction table. But we only allow marketing users to query the Power Billing transaction table. All they can do is see what is in there. They can never add anything or change it. And so we have a whole set of SQL commands, grant and revoke, that we use to set up these groups and allow access to the data. Now we can also use encryption so that as we put our data into the database, it can be encrypted. And so that if anybody even then accesses that data, they won't be able to get it without the encryption key. Of course, if we lose the encryption key, then we will never get it either, which is a problem, and partially why the many systems, the data inside databases is not encrypted, where we try to protect the data through different access levels, but we don't always encrypt it. And finally, we always have to have a way of monitoring what is going on with our systems. So, as I was saying, we have an audit log built into our Power Billing application, and of course, all DBMSs have before and after imaging and transaction log that allows them to keep access of to monitor what different things, tables, columns are being accessed. Well, the data dictionary can also have that type of information. Information about how many accesses, which users accessed, or which user groups access the data, things that can be derived from the audit log or the before and after image files. And this makes the data dictionary that we talked about before a much more alive document that so that you know which column of which tables change the most throughout your year of use of the system. You can learn a lot about how the data are changing and what are the most rapidly changing and the most stable different parts of your database. It's a very interesting way, or an addition to the metadata that a data dictionary provided and that we talked about before. Well, so this monitoring that you can get from this usage data allows you to maybe adjust some of your access rights. Maybe you've discovered that you really don't need multiple. You need only 2 levels of access rather than multiple levels. Sort of a read, a insert, and update. Right, 3 different levels of security. Maybe the person that can update can also insert and read, but the person that can insert can only read but not update. So that kind of analysis of that data from your usage patterns can give you something interesting for not only those applications, but also how you might want to spread the data for that system across different disks. And when you have multiple systems using the DBMS and you are setting access up to disks, there's some interesting trade-offs there. Although the way we did it, to be honest, was we just gave sort of 2 disks to every major application that we had. And so we had Oracle, one instance of Oracle, and then we would have 2 disks for each application, one for the data, one for the indexes and other image files and things. But well, to summarize, data is really a valuable, important resource to organizations. And the more we use it, the more important it's going to become over time. People are becoming much more comfortable with data, and as we go forward, people will be getting more and more used to using data. And I think without database knowledge, you're really missing an important idea in how to work in organizations. Not just you guys who are wanting to be IT people. Of course, you need to know database. I think people that just want to work need to know something about database. Not as much as you do, right? But something. Of course, I am speaking to the choir, or I am the choir, I guess. Well, the DBA has the major responsibilities for the database, both managerial and technical. Sometimes there's higher level people, but they're more likely to be in larger organizations. Some places will have a true CIO who is at the level of other corporate executives. In security, that's one of the most critical issues in databases. How do we maintain our confidentiality of our data? And of course, we know that without integrity, we have nothing really to protect. If our data aren't correct and accurate and timely, then we're not going to be really supporting the organization to give it what it needs. Well, all systems have some vulnerabilities, and our job is to find out what they are and try to eliminate them. And we often get auditors in to audit our systems to help us with that.